This watch seemed to be quite popular, however, I can hardly find any reviews of it on the interweb, and yet it looks, at least in the pictures, to be one of the best, if not the best, homage to a very famous watch. So, what's the deal? Well, I bought it. It is here, so let's find out. Hello and welcome back. Yes, we buy and review timepieces that other reviewers don't. Well, some other reviewers. So hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything. Everyone's taste is different, especially when it comes to watches, and not everyone follows the mainstream opinion, which I think is the beauty of watch collecting. For me, for example, even though I really like Omega watches, the Seamaster was never on top of my Omega Grail list, and actually still isn't. As a matter of fact, it competes really closely for the second place with Speedmaster, although these days I consider Seamaster to be somewhat more practical. However, on the top spot of my Omega Grail list was and still is the Planet Ocean. Now, I'm not suggesting that this Phylida will scratch that itch and replace a $6,000 or is it now $7,000 Omega Planet Ocean watch, but one of the reasons collectors go for Homage watches is to get a feel how it will wear and look, and to either reaffirm their belief that this is their grail or to have a reality check and possibly look at alternatives. But before I get way too philosophical, let's take a closer look at this Phylida. As the initial impression, three things stood out for me straight away. First, the bracelet. This is probably the best interpretation of this style stainless steel bracelet that I can find at this price point. Second, the price. Yes, it is quite affordable timepiece and I will talk about it in a moment. And third, 500 meters of declared water resistance. Well, I'm not planning to do half-kilometer dives anytime soon, but it looks like I'm sorted for my upcoming holiday snorkeling classes. And as we go through the details, I should point out that despite the fact that this Phylida borrowed, should I say, some design cues from that famous watch, there are some differences. Some of those differences are kind of obvious and some are not so much, and of course I will point them out in this video. Price and packaging. Well, first the price. For what we get here, based on my initial impression, the watch is very competitively priced. I bought it for $134 from Phylida store on AliExpress. There are some discount vouchers available from time to time, so you can possibly knock off $5 or more, but generally, Phylida store doesn't spoil us with crazy discounts like some other brands on AliExpress. Phylida packaging is very straightforward. Box and the watch with a tag. And that's it. Dimensions. Okay, we are expecting a watch with a presence and Phylida doesn't disappoint, however, they still managed to make it quite wearable. As a matter of fact, we even tried it on a 6¼ wrist, and I will of course share a footage of that science experiment later in this video. So we have 43.3mm diameter bezel, which is in line with 43.5mm diameter specified by Phylida. However, even though the bezel kinda defines the visual size of this watch, I should point out that the case is somewhat larger, measured just under 44.5mm across. There is a functional purpose for that extra width to serve as crown guards, so it does make sense, but still something to keep in mind. Now, not being very different from the watch that it's inspired by, this Phylida is also quite tall, measured at 15.9mm. When it comes to like measurement, we have a 51.4mm distance, which combined with inverted end links will definitely help to manage this chunky dive watch on the wrist. Now, here is an interesting detail. Phylida opted for 20mm lugs here. 20mm is a very popular size, however, 21mm lugs in theory might have suited the proportions of this watch better. Now, personally, I think Phylida managed to make it work with a 20mm bracelet here, and to be honest, I didn't even realize it wasn't 21mm until I measured it. The supplied stainless steel bracelet will cover up to 8¼ wrist, or about 21cm, and on a supplied bracelet this watch weighs 223 grams and 203 grams after adjusting it to my about 7-inch wrist. It is a hefty watch. For the record, 43.5mm Omega Planet Ocean watch, weighs 217 grams. Case. We have a full stainless steel construction here, we have a twisted lug design, however Phylida somewhat simplified it, making the lugs a bit more angular. While this might look like a bit of a compromise, a slightly more square sculpted lug actually work much better with more square shape of the bracelet and links, making the integration of bracelet and the case somewhat more seamless. We have a few different finishes here. The flanks and top of the lugs are brushed, while the chamfers running along the top of the sides of the case are mirror polished. The crown side of the case, as I mentioned earlier, is sculpted to be more prominent and plays a function of crown guards. I like the crown grip, however, I should point out that I found the crown to be a bit too close to the bezel, reducing the grip area, and this felt when I tried to unscrew and screw back the crown by rubbing my thumb on the bezel edge. Not the end of the world, but possibly another compromise by Phylida to avoid the crown sticking out way too far on this already chunky watch. Now, once the crown is out, the winding and setting the time and date is smooth and not a problem at all. We have, of course, a helium escape valve outside the 10 o'clock position. With declared 500 meters of water resistance, this valve kind of makes sense, and of course it does go in line with the overall aesthetics of this watch. The helium valve is signed, unlike the main crown, and has the same grip design. If we unscrew the valve, we can feel a soft spring that will keep it open when unscrewed, but the valve doesn't come loose completely, which is a good thing. Obviously, both crowns need to be tightly screwed on if we are to take this watch anywhere near the water. I like the quality of the finishing of the case, it is done pretty well, and the transitions between the facets are smooth and crisp in the same time. The back of the case is mirror polished, and we have a prominent screw-on back case with clean and simple circular brushing with a mirror polished bevel. It is not a fully sterile look, we still get some engraving of specs highlights, but no more than that. Bezel. We have a unidirectional 120 click bezel with ceramic insert and lumped peep. The build quality and attention to detail of the bezel insert is quite impressive. If we are to take a closer look, we will see a kind of three-dimensional design with ever so slightly protruding minute markers on the 15-minute scale and engraved 10th-minute markers and dividers on the ceramic surface. As a result, we get a nice reflection light play on the bezel, giving it a somewhat premium look. And being a ceramic bezel, it not only looks good, but it is also quite scratch resistant, which should help to maintain that premium shine for a long time. The bezel edge is well machined and it is easy to grip. No problem there. When it comes to bezel action, it is okay, but to be honest, this is not the most refined bezel mechanism I handled. In general, there is a very little backplay, which is good. However, the resistance is a notch on the high side, which probably gives the bezel a bit of a rough feel when turning. Other than that, I really like this bezel, and yes, the 12 o'clock marker alignment is spot on. Dial. We have a black background dial. It is not glossy piano black, but a rather deep matte black color, which still makes the rest of the dial pop quite nicely. We have printed minute chaptering and applied hour indices. I like the highly polished edges of the hour indices and the facets on broad arrow minute and hour hands, and the way they play in the light. The orange Arabic hour markers at 6, 9 and 12 o'clock positions are also applied. I like the orange accents on the hour markers and on the third line of the text at the bottom of the dial. Orange accents are not only stylistically pleasing, of course, but also play a very practical role on this dive watch, with orange being one of the better visible colors underwater. We have a date window at 3 o'clock position. The date window frame has well-finished bevels around the edges, and we have a crisp white on black date indicator, nicely matching the background color of the dial. I already mentioned the broad arrow hands. The hands are well proportioned and well executed, including the second hand, which has a nice splash of red on the tip. We have a Phylida brand name under the 12 o'clock marker, nice and clean. The dial is not cluttered and is well executed, even though no prizes for originality go to Phylida here. We also have a decent lume, BG9 according to Phylida's listing, with dial lume being shade of blue, while the bezel lume pip is a shade of green. Lume is unlikely to win any major lume competitions, but it is still quite potent and will definitely help with legibility in the dark. Crystal. We have a nice double dome sapphire crystal here. It sits pretty much flush with the bezel. I think the whole integration of the bezel and crystal is done very well. Gives this watch case a nice and cohesive look. Now, there is no mention of any anti-reflective coating in the listing, and I'm not seeing much of it on the actual watch crystal either. Taking into account the price point of this watch, I definitely don't consider this a deal breaker. The dial is still very legible as is, however, it would be good to have some kind of AR undercoating applied. I like Phylida's choice of movement here. Seiko NH35 is a really good option in my opinion, giving us a reputable and reliable Japanese movement and still keeping the price low. I covered this movement a lot in my previous videos, but as a quick recap, it is an automatic mechanical movement with about 41 hours of power reserve, beating at 21,600 vibrations per hour. It can be hand-wind and it is hackable, that is, the second hand will stop when we're setting the time. Bracelet. As I mentioned at the start of this video, this Phylida has probably one of the best implementations of the stainless steel bracelet for this type of diver. We have solid end links, the end links are inverted, which of course helps with the comfort on the wrist. The bracelet links are also solid and well sized and feel well proportioned and suitable for this somewhat big watch head. We have a kinda oyster style on steroids look here. The sides of these chunky bracelet links are mirror polished and the rest of the bracelet surfaces are brushed. Also, what looks like a three-piece link design is actually a single link comprised of 3 parts. In general, the bracelet is well finished and feels comfortable on the wrist. The links are held together by pins, which is okay at this price point. The bracelet feels nice and solid, and tolerances are pretty tight. Not as tight as on some other more expensive timepieces on AliExpress, but acceptable at the price point of this watch. One more subtle but important detail is that Phylida included half links on both sides of the clasp, so we can accurately size the bracelet, which is pretty good taking into account that there are no other macro adjustment options. And now we get to the clasp, and we have a fully milled double pusher scissor clasp here. The tolerances on the clasp are pretty good, making it robust and sturdy in operation. And we have a diver extension, which is also executed pretty well and is a welcome feature on this dive watch. Again, I think this is one of the better dive watch clasps on AliExpress in this price segment. And here is how this watch looks on my about 7-inch wrist. It is a chunky watch, but it is still well balanced on the wrist and can be worn above or below the bone, kind of closer to the wrist. And here is this watch, as I promised earlier, on a 6¼ wrist. If you like big and prominent timepieces, this could actually work with a bit of a stretch. So, what's my final verdict? Well, for $134, this is an excellent watch. Couple of areas of improvement, probably the main one for me would be the branding. I'd like to see a signed crown and a signed clasp, and possibly review of a brand name, although there are definitely more challenging brand names on AliExpress, at least Phylida is easily pronounceable. Now, another possible improvement would be an air coating and maybe more refined bezel action. Having said that, none of these are deal breakers for me, not at its current price. And if you want to see more dive watches, I will put a link to a playlist somewhere here and a playlist to some other cool watches over here. And of course, if you find this review helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so. And as always, thank you for watching, take care, stay safe, and I will see you in the next video.